It has long been a dream of mine to visit Montana, and this past summer I finally crossed it off my bucket list and planned a week-long camping excursion in Kootenai National Forest. I do a lot of traveling and hiking solo. I only have a few friends and they aren't really interested in the outdoors. Kootenai National Park is one of the wildest places in Montana, far in the northwest part of the state, and butt up against the border with Canada. It was a little tricky to get to and involved 2 flights and a long car ride, but eventually I made it. I had a map of the park and a rough idea of where I wanted to visit and where I would make camp each night. It was like some of the more touristy places like Yellowstone and Zion. There's a lot more freedom to set camp where you want and basically just explore on your own. The first 2 days were great, coming from the city and being able to explore mountains and lakes without another soul in sight was a very liberating experience, and I was dreading going back to the concrete jungle in just a couple of days. But the 3rd night I started to experience, well, strange things. I was exhausted after a full day of hiking, and after cooking a freeze-dried dinner, I crawled into my tent just as the sun went down. My tent was thin, a single-person backpacking model, and offered no protection except for rain and bugs. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a heavy thud echo from somewhere deep in the forest. I immediately became alert. The noise continued slowly and monotonously, becoming louder and louder. It sounded like it had come right up to the edge of my camp, maybe 30 yards away. I had my rain fly up, couldn't see anything, and didn't dare to leave my tent. After about 10 minutes of silence, the noise began again, but this time heading away from my camp until fading away altogether. I stayed awake for hours until I just couldn't fight it anymore, and eventually passed out. When I awoke, the sun was already high in the sky, and I scrambled to eat breakfast and pack up. Before leaving, I decided to go and investigate the area where I had heard the noises last night. What I found set me hard on edge. Print in the hard earth, at least twice the size of a typical man. The prints were deep, whatever it was heavy, and it appeared to have 4 long curving claws on each foot. I decided it was a good idea to get far away from this spot. I spent a good deal of time outdoors and researching, and was fairly confident that whatever made these prints was something common to man. I hiked southeast for most of the day and settled on a spot near a tiny lake. I hadn't thought to bring any fishing tackle and didn't really have room anyway, so I just let the perfect view wash away the memories from last night. However, things were going to get so much worse. I was still a little wary and decided I would stay awake for a few extra minutes, just in case. Sure enough, about 20 minutes after sundown, I heard the slow pounding again. I rushed out of my tent and took position about 40 feet away behind some bushes. I didn't want to be trapped if that thing came into camp. The thunderous footfalls continued, getting closer and closer. I was quivering with terror and wished I had just kept running, but it was too late now. The thing was too close. It was right on the edge of my camp. The sight before me was more horrifying than I can put into words. It was immense, at least 13 or 14 feet tall. It walked on 2 crooked legs, and flayed skin covered the body with patches of bone showing through. Its rib cage was completely exposed, and its head looked like that of a deer's skull. A single antler spouted from the right side, the left looking to have been broken off at the stump. This time it did not hesitate. It moved purposely into the middle of my camp and went right for my tent. It took its 2 heavy claws and ripped the tent open, and then reached inside, fishing around for something. Me. After realizing I wasn't there, the creature let out a series of hoarse shrieks and whistles, like a wounded deer I had once heard. The sound filled the air and seemed to echo on long after they should have. I was too frozen with terror to even think about moving, and just watched as the beast tossed my tent and shredded the few other belongings I had left in the camp. Its call was answered by the same noise, from somewhere far, far in the north. After destroying my camp, the creature lumbered off the way it had come, and the pounding of its heavy feet faded away. I laid still for hours, not able to work up the courage to move. Finally, just as the sun began to show itself, I moved into the camp. I was able to salvage my travel documents, but nothing else. The food had been shredded, and my tent was useless. I didn't want to waste any time and started off in the rough direction of where the park's headquarters was. A day later, exhausted and dehydrated, I made it. I guess one of the rangers saw I was in severe trouble and set me up in a room to rest because I woke up the next day on a rough cot. A few scratches and cuts had been treated. I spoke with one of the rangers and thanked him for his help. I was able to heal up quickly and didn't need any serious treatment. I told the ranger about what had happened and what I had seen. When I described the creature, he got a very odd look on his face. Surprise, but not disbelief. He told me it would be best if I kept this to myself. Very few people would believe me. And after thinking about it, I agreed. After digging around and watching some videos, it sounds like what I encountered was something called a wendigo. I don't know if that's what it was or something else. I just know that it stalked me for 2 days, and if I had been in my tent, well, I wouldn't be writing this. Maybe the wild places just need to stay wild. This story is so insane that the woman who shared it has asked to be referred to by the name of Michelle. She says that the encounter was so intense that she hasn't shared it with anyone, mainly because she doesn't want to take the chance of having to live with the stigma of being called crazy. The encounter starts with Michelle leaving her house on the morning of November 19th, 2003, for her daily run before work. It was early morning, and an unusually warm morning for November in Michigan, which can be cold, especially where she lived in East Lansing, in an apartment near Michigan State University. The sun had just started to peek over the horizon, which meant that the temps would now slowly start to creep upwards. At this time, the streets were still mostly deserted, with only a few cars driving by every now and then, which was exactly how Michelle liked it. Mornings like this were what kept her head clear and sane. She had a usual route that she ran, and her body could do it on autopilot. She ran along the road because it had a sidewalk and it felt safe. This particular day, she was deep in thought as her feet rhythmically hit the ground, thinking of a vacation she had coming with a group of girls, when all of a sudden she heard commotion in a grouping of bushes nearby. Now, ordinarily, a strange noise wouldn't have fazed her since she's always been more of a city girl, and she knew that it was usually best to ignore strange noises and just move away from them quickly. But this noise was different. It sounded large, like whatever was making the noise was big. Michelle quickly remembered the flyers she saw in her apartment building by the mailboxes for a neighbor's missing dog that had last been seen about 3 days ago. Her first thought was she wondered if it could be that dog. She knew she had to check. She would never forgive herself if she didn't. And so she quickly stopped and tried to peer behind the bushes, trying to see what had made the noise. As she leaned forward trying to get a better visual, suddenly out from the shadows stepped a very large wolf-like creature. It was easily as big as a full-grown man, and it was now standing completely upright, staring at her. Michelle stood there with her eyes as wide as saucers. She could see that it was about the size of a very large German shepherd standing on its long back legs, with a long neck, large furry head, and fur-covered arms that hung lower than seemed to be normal. But of course, nothing about this was normal. Its fur was light brown with some black mixed in. She remembers wishing she had a gun. She clearly felt danger emanating from the creature. It then began to slowly stalk towards her, and then it just stopped and stood there, staring at her for an amount of time that seemed like forever, and yet at the same time could have been seconds. And then the wind began to pick up, and the scent of the creature hit her. It was a rank, putrid smell that made her nauseous. Eventually, it turned around and walked away into the woods, leaving Michelle standing there completely dumbfounded, watching it as it melted back into the darkness from the direction it had come. Michelle remained frozen in place for a few moments after the creature had disappeared, and then she immediately abandoned the rest of her run and turned around to make her way back home, trying to make sense of what she had seen, but also trying not to think about it so that she could get herself home safely. The whole way back, she tried to tell herself that it was just a large dog, but she knew that wasn't the truth. It had been too big and too feral, too much like a werewolf. And then, before getting too far, she thought about turning around to try and see if she really had just experienced this unknown creature. But she pretty quickly realized that that was a really bad idea, considering she was alone. It was so early in the morning and the rest of the neighborhood was likely still asleep. So, she abandoned that idea for now, but told herself that one day she would come back to try and find whatever it was that she had seen that morning. As she started off again, she could still smell the creature, and then, off in the distance, she thought she heard a howl that sounded almost human. And then additional howls that sounded like they were coming. She ran home as fast as she could, not wanting to be caught out in the open if that thing came back. When she got back inside her house, she quickly locked all of the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. And then she called the police. It took a while for them to arrive, and by the time they did, the sun was up, and she could see their cruiser pull into her driveway. Michelle ran out to meet them and recounted her story to the officers, but they didn't seem too concerned. They told her they would head over to the area she mentioned and look around. They also promised to look into it and see if anyone else in the neighborhood had reported anything similar, but she never heard back from them, and she decided not to reach back out. She figured that they wouldn't find anything anyway. Because whatever she had seen that morning was long gone by now, she was sure of it. She was convinced that it was smart enough to know that it shouldn't been seen by the light of day. The whole incident left her feeling unsettled, and she began to feel like she was being watched. She was careful to lock her doors and windows every night, but still, every time she went outside, she felt like eyes were on her, judging her, waiting for her. And not only from the creature, but she felt self-conscious that people knew her story and were judging her when they saw her. The encounter was basically eating away at her self-confidence and even her sanity. But she never did see the creature again. And eventually she convinced herself that it had all just been a dream, a very vivid dream at that. Because the alternative, believing in it, was just too difficult. And even now, years later, she still sometimes hears that howl in her dreams, and she still lets the thoughts into her mind that it might have been real. I was staying with my grandma after she had an operation on her knee. To be honest, she probably should have been in assisted living, but she was always a pretty independent lady and wanted to stay that way for as long as possible. She could still take care of herself and was in her right mind most of the time. I say most of the time because sometimes she would randomly say things that made no sense, but then she would act completely normal the rest of the day. She was going to need a little help after her operation, so instead of getting a caretaker for her, I took some time off work and elected to stay over and help her out. I should note that my grandmother lived in an older house set deep in the woods of rural Georgia. Her father built the house, and she ended up with it after her parents died. None of her siblings wanted it, but she felt attached to it and lived there ever since. We used to visit in the summer months when school was out, but there were very strict rules. One of the rules you dared not break, was that no one was to leave the yard. We could play on the mowed grass, but as soon as the grass turned to weeds, we were not allowed past it, and we would get beat if we ever set foot in the forest. Back then, I thought Grandma was just worried we'd get lost in the woods, but as I would come to learn, it wasn't that at all. She wasn't worried about us getting lost. She was worried about us getting taken. You see, there's something that lives out there in those woods. Something evil. It's neither human, nor is it an animal. I don't think anyone quite knows what the creature is, but there have been sightings and stories of these things all over the world. People just don't like to talk about them. The locals learned to live with them. It was my first night there after Grandma had been released from the hospital. I had forgotten something in my car and went out to get it. It was around 8 p.m. and was getting dark. Grandma heard me open the front door and screamed for me to shut it. I told her that I was just going to my car, but she begged me to wait until morning. My car was only 30 feet from the door. I could see it out the window. I figured she was just on one of her weird tangents again, or maybe she was a little loopy from the painkillers. I told her that I would be fine and that I would be back in a minute. She stopped me before I went out the door and said, "Don't follow the lights. Don't follow the voices." It was weird, but that was normal for her. She would say weird things like that all the time. Things that made no sense, or things I thought made no sense. I assured her that I would only be gone for a minute and that everything was fine. And then I went out to my car. It was dark out, but I could see enough of the surrounding area by the porch light. I unlocked my car and the headlights turned on, lighting the driveway even more. I wasn't worried, not in the slightest. I was digging in the passenger side of my car, looking for whatever thing I had forgotten. I can't even remember what it was or why it was so important, but suddenly I had the feeling that I was being watched. I felt fine just a second ago, but now I feel odd. Like there was something wrong, but I didn't know what. Something told me to look up. It was like that feeling you get when you think someone is following you, so you suddenly turn around to look. That was the feeling I had. I looked up, and in the forest I saw what looked like lights. I counted 6 of them, tiny golden lights all in a row. I was focused on the lights in front of me, trying to figure out what they were when I had that feeling again. The feeling that I need to turn around and look at something behind me. So I did. And there were lights behind me too. Now another line of lights. I spun around and they were everywhere. I didn't know what to think. I had no idea what they could be. I heard my grandma banging on the window. She yelled at me to come inside. I saw the lights in the forest directly in the line of the headlights of my car. They weren't there a moment ago, but they were there now. I turned on the high beams to see if I could get a glimpse of what they were, and I was horrified. The golden lights, they were eyes, dozens and dozens of eyes. I couldn't get a good look at the creature, but I saw it well enough to never want to see it again. It looked almost human. It was ghoulish. It had pale skin, nearly gray in color. Its body was angular and bony. It had arms and legs like a human, but was sitting hunched over. I couldn't see its face very well, but I did see that its nose was just a hole in its head. It looked almost like a skull. I ran back inside the moment I realized what I was looking at. I was shaking when I slammed the door behind me. I could barely catch my breath. My grandma just said, "I told you not to go out there." I couldn't get much information out of her regarding the creatures. She told me never go out at night and never go into the forest, day or night. She also told me that they can mimic voices, and if I hear someone in the forest asking for help, don't follow them. I asked what they wanted from us, but she couldn't, or rather wouldn't, give me an answer. She just said that as long as I followed the rules, I wouldn't have to worry. I'm an amateur photographer and nature enthusiast, always on the lookout for new and exciting things to capture on camera. This particular adventure took place in the dense forests of the Appalachian Mountains, where I had heard rumors of strange and unexplained sightings. I was excited to explore the area, but little did I know that I was about to encounter something that would change my perspective on the unexplained forever. As an avid hiker and camper, I had always been drawn to the Appalachian Mountains. I had heard whispers of unusual sightings and stories of creatures that lurked in the woods, but I had never encountered anything that I couldn't explain. That was until my latest trip. It was a crisp autumn morning when I first caught sight of it. Unlike anything I had ever seen, a creature was perched on a nearby tree branch. It was about the size of a large dog, but its features were distinctly simian, with sharp claws and piercing eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. It looked like something out of a horror movie, and I was terrified. Despite my fear, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to investigate. I slowly approached the creature, camera in hand, trying to get a better look. But as I got closer, it suddenly leaped from the branch and disappeared into the dense underbrush. I was left alone, my heart racing and unsure of what to do next. Over the next few days, I saw the creature several more times, always from a distance. It seemed to be watching me, almost studying me. I began to feel like I was being stalked by some wild animal, but this was no ordinary beast. It was intelligent and cunning and seemed to be almost human-like in its behavior. I confided in my spouse about what I had seen, but they were skeptical, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. That was until they saw the creature for themselves. We both knew that we had to figure out what was going on. As the days passed, the sightings became more frequent, and the creature became more brazen. It would come right up to our campsite, making eerie noises and awful screeches that echoed through the forest. We knew we had to get to the bottom of this before it was too late. Our fear and anxiety were at an all-time high. We didn't know what this creature was capable of or what it wanted from us. The constant fear of the unknown was starting to wear on us, and we knew that we had to find answers. One night, we were woken up by a loud scratching on the side of our tent. We could hear the creature snarling and growling just outside, and we knew that it was trying to get in. We were terrified, but luckily the creature eventually gave up and disappeared into the night. We knew we had to leave the area and seek help. We spent weeks researching and talking to locals, trying to uncover the truth behind the creature's identity. We finally came across an old legend that described a creature known as the devil monkey. We couldn't believe what we were reading, but it all made sense. According to our research, the devil monkey was a mischievous creature that liked to torment and scare humans. It was said to have razor-sharp claws and teeth, and it was known to be fiercely territorial. We learned that the devil monkey had been seen in the Appalachian Mountains for generations, but sightings had become less frequent in recent years. Some believed that the creature was nothing more than a myth, but we knew that it was real. After our encounter with the devil monkey, we decided to leave the area and return home. We had accomplished our goal of uncovering the truth, and we knew that we had to share our experiences with others. We reported our findings to local authorities and animal experts, but it never seemed to catch on with anyone. The experience had been both terrifying and exhilarating, and it had changed us forever. We were now believers in the unexplained, and we knew that there was so much more out there waiting to be discovered. Our encounter with the devil monkey opened a new world of possibilities for us. We began to seek out other unexplained phenomena. We knew we had a unique perspective, and we were excited to share it with the world. Looking back on our encounter with the devil monkey, we realized how lucky we were to have survived. We had been in the presence of a wild and unpredictable creature, and we knew that we had to respect its power and intelligence. Our experience had shown us that there was so much more to the world than what we could see. We had been forced to confront our fears and doubts, and we had become stronger because of it. We knew that there were still many mysteries waiting to be uncovered, and we were excited to continue our journey of discovery. I was in my hometown outside of Albany, New York for Father's Day. It had been a very long time since my family had been all together at one time and in one place. My siblings and I had all scattered once we took jobs and got married. My dad was the main anchor of our family and unfortunately had been diagnosed with cancer that spring. So we all decided to have a big party for him for Father's Day. He didn't know we were all coming together for it, and it was intended to be a surprise. I was driving to the cabin because I didn't care for planes much. And at the time this happened, I wasn't living too far away. Just a state away in Scranton, Pennsylvania. My mom asked if I'd be okay to drive up to the cabin a few days in advance to set up the place. Get it cleaned and set up with party streamers and things. Since I lived the closest other than my mom and dad, I agreed to head up on Friday night. I had gotten into the state a little after 6 in the evening, but I needed to drive an hour or two more before I'd actually reach the cabin. I had stopped in a suburban area very close to where I grew up. I needed gas and a snack, but my mom said to be careful that someone we knew didn't see me, like these nosy neighbors we had. She didn't want the surprise to be ruined, so I raced inside, paid for everything, and left. When I got back on the road, I regretted my stop. It seemed to have made me more tired than I expected. I had been driving for hours and I was alone, so I was getting sleepy. But I knew I was almost there, which helped a little. And I was super excited to see everyone. I turned some music on and started trying to sing along so I wouldn't doze off. It was weird being back in town without seeing anyone. It felt like I was a ghost in a way. And I think it made that night more eerie. Feeling like you're a ghost in your own town. I really wanted to see my cousin, so she promised to meet me at the cabin the following day. Plus, who really wants to stay in a cabin by a lake all alone for 2 days? Not me. I hoped I had enough decorations. But my cousin said that if I didn't, they'd gladly bring some extra stuff that they had. I started to get towards the edge of town. I knew when I was going over the creek because of this strange bump and weird, uneven feeling of the bridge. The bridge didn't have a top or anything like that, so in the dark, unless you knew it was there wouldn't be any sign of it, except the sensation of you being bounced around in your car. There were lots of trees at this point and houses were becoming scarce, but I'd still see one every now and then. It was now getting close to 8 at night. I knew I was only a half an hour away from the cabin. The road started to get a bit more intense. There were a lot more twists and turns at this point. I had been to the cabin several times as a kid, but I didn't remember the road being so crazy. I am a nervous driver, so I needed to take things slower than the average person. I start to turn around this bend in the road. My headlights were a bit dim, so I turned on my brights. And as soon as I did this, I could have sworn I saw something on one of the trees. Followed another bend in the road, and then I saw it again. This time I saw it more clearly. It was pale. It didn't appear to have hair. What I could see was simply a creature with pale skin. It was hanging off the trunk of the tree. It reminded me of a kind of chimp or monkey or something, probably because of its long fingers and toes. It all stood out so prominently from the trees because of its pale skin, so I could easily see that the fingers and toes seemed to wrap around the tree. Not completely, but enough to make it look like it was suctioned to the tree. And its eyes, they still glowed. But this time I knew it wasn't a cat. It was about the size of a small child, I'd say. I wish I could tell you about its face. I really couldn't see all that much. It was blocked by the tree's trunk, but it was sort of sticking out, like it was looking out towards me. I started to freak out. I wasn't sure if this thing was following me or what it was doing. I just knew I didn't feel comfortable. And I was well aware of the fact that I was all alone. I didn't want to stop the car. I raced through the trees and to the cabin. I didn't bother to focus on where my headlights were shining because I was so scared that I'd see the thing again. I didn't. When I pulled into the driveway of the cabin, I immediately grabbed my cell phone and dialed my mom's number. I told her what had happened. I was hysterical, and the experience ended up ruining my dad's surprise party because I just couldn't stand the thought of being there alone. So I left and headed home without decorating or getting ready for the party. Needless to say, my dad was happy to see me. The family did all convene for the party, but it was no longer a surprise, and there were no decorations set up in advance. We all had a great time, and there were no further sightings of that creature. Father's Day turned out good in the end, but I'll never go to that cabin again.